the marriage was going south. I mean, went south quickly, So at that point, it was like, I would rather be happy than married.
Welcome back to another episode of Daddy Issues. Our guest today is going to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his story.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. My name is Corwin Melvin. I'm a dad. I was a single dad, raised my three sons. So I got to a point where, they were all grown and gone. So I met this wonderful woman who said, maybe you should write a book. Early last year, I sat down and got started. By the end of the year, I was done. So I got a non-author, have never written anything more than, a resume and a couple white papers for work. And now I'm writing a book. So I got through it. I was able to publish my first book, Just a Dad. And with it, it's kind of it's not a bucket list thing, but it was one of those things that, it's an accomplishment. So
Absolutely.
it was big for me, to get past that, especially with the way, things are going now, the climate in this country, a lot of things are going on. There's a lot of turmoil, so this was good to get this kind of just out there, so it's very therapeutic, if nothing else. So I was raised by my single mom, up in Cherry Hill Projects in Baltimore. Me, my brother, my sister. I was the youngest of the three, so never had a relationship with my father. So a big part of who I am today is because, you can go two different ways when you're raised in that kind of and under those circumstances. You can either be like that man who wasn't there, who was not very good at this, that, and the other, who you didn't have a relationship with, or you can go and try to be the best man that you can be because of those circumstances. So for me, it was a lot of, I do not want to be that person. So if I have kids, I know that there are things that I'm going to want to do, do way differently than how that went for me. So, being raised by my mom, it was tough. We were poor, so that whole thing was a struggle. Just that whole life was a struggle. As I was growing up, this, that, and the other, I went to school. I thought I was very smart in school because school came easy, never really had to study, always got A's and B's, so I thought I was the smart kid until I went to college. Now, when you get to college, you realize, hey, I never learned how to study. I never learned how to manage my time. So those are probably the two biggest things you can teach your children nowadays: time management and how to study, how to focus. If you go to university and you don't have those skills, it's a struggle. So 2 years in, I got the little letter from the administration saying, well, maybe you should find something else to do with your life, Mr.
Wow.
Melvin. If you can't get yourself together over this next semester, then yeah, you're probably not going to have a place here. The old academic probation letter. So I got that letter, and then as soon as I got that letter, I went straight to downtown Baltimore to the recruiting office. I walked in Baltimore, the recruiting office. As you walk in the door, there's the Army on the left, there's the Air Force, then there's the Navy, and then there's Marine Corps. So I walk in, the first one I walk into is the Navy, and I see this big aircraft carrier in the middle of the ocean. Nothing. I hate water. So I never even stepped all the way into the office. I already knew that that's not going to work. I walked into the Marine Corps office. They were gung-ho, this, that, and the other. I wanted to be a Marine. But then I went to talk to the Marine Corps recruiter another time, on another occasion, and he wasn't there. So I walked into the Air Force recruiter's office, and that changed my life. Because the first thing he said, when you go in the Army and the Marine Corps, the first you are is a soldier. So it doesn't matter what they train you in. Whatever skills you have, or whatever, they can tell you you're going to be some kind of computer operator. You're going to be some kind of technician, but you're always going to be a soldier. So there's always a chance that you're going to have a gun. You're going to be out there with a ruck on your back, this and the other. We don't do that. If we train you, that's what you're going to do. That's going to be your job, this and the others. It's changed my life. The recruiter I had was probably the best, one of the biggest influences in me, because he said, hey, I scored so well on the test. He said, you can pick any job you want. But if I were you, I would pick a job that had a security clearance, because in 4 years, if you want to get out, you can always find a job if you have a security clearance. So he steered me in that direction, and he was right. So there are a lot of opportunities if you have a skill and you have a security clearance. So there's a lot of opportunities. So he was correct. So I went in the military. My first assignment was Keys Air Force Base in Mississippi. I had no interest in going to Mississippi. Another guy that I was in school with, he had Fort Meade. So we did a swap. I went to Fort Meade. Fort Meade is 30 minutes from my mother's house. So my family, they were like, I thought you was in the Air Force. Why do we see you every weekend? because I'm right down the road. So that's good and bad. Being that close to family, like I said, it can go a lot of different ways. I had a good time. Didn't take anything really serious. My job was fairly easy, so it was easy to work all day and then party all night. So I did a lot of that. I met the woman that I would marry down and hanging out down in Landover, and just outside of DC. Met her at a club. Um, Mistake number one. Met her at a club. Um, then about 8, 9 months later, I got an assignment to Germany, and we were going hot and heavy. And I thought I was, oh, let's go. You want to go? You want to go? So we decided that we would get married. So she'd come to Germany with me. Okay, so we get married. Way too young. Way too young. I was 24. She was 21. But age has nothing to do with level of maturity. I was
Mhm.
not ready to be married. 3 months after we got married, they canceled that assignment. So now I'm married and I have no idea what I'm doing. So there was a lot of fumbling around, in this marriage, not really trying to figure it out, this, that, and the other. A couple separations, it kind of just wasn't going well. Then I got another assignment. I went to England, and about a year into that assignment, I asked her to come over. So we're back together, this, that, and the other. Fast forward, we start having kids. Even though there's some issues in the marriage, whatever. Every time things start to get to where they were going to reach a boiling point, we had another child. So it was kind of like the timing was like keep them together, keep them together, keep them together. We were together I was married ultimately for 17 years. By the time we got to probably, I was getting near my end of my Air Force assignment, my Air Force time. I was getting right around 18, 19 years in the Air Force, starting to think about retirement, this, that, and the other. The marriage was going south. I mean, went south quickly, So at that point, it was like, I would rather be happy than married.
Hey guys, real quick, if you can jump over to patreon.com/daddyissuestheTruth, help support what we're doing, help support the channel, just so we can get as many dads as we can on the podcast and share their stories, and hopefully it's helping you guys out. That would be huge, man. And I definitely need your support, could use your support. And I hope that what we're doing is helpful to you. So if you guys could help out, patreon.com/daddyissuestheTruth, and greatly appreciated, man. Thank you guys. All right, back to the episode.
We were miserable together. And once your kids can see that, and at some point, even they, know that, oh, these people, they're not getting along, so why would you want to stay in a house with all these people and everybody's unhappy? And, the marriage is going really bad at this point. We're really not getting along. So I make the decision that, hey, maybe it would be better if it's time for me to go, basically, because it's at a point where we're not getting along. This is not going to work. So at that point, I started talking to different people, and for me, it was never going to be, I'm leaving my kids. That was
Right.
never a part of my thought process. I just needed somebody else to hear somebody say that that's a possibility. So I talked to a couple of lawyers or whatever, and one guy said, hey, there's nothing that says that you can't get custody of your children. There's no law that says that. He said, so all you have to do is make sure that you're taking care of things you need to take care of. Your kids are squared away and there's no issues there. And if you present yourself the right way, you can get that opportunity. That one guy that said that was enough for me to want to take a chance at it, right? So I went to court, I petitioned for custody. I actually got custody of my sons before my divorce was even filed. A year
Were
before
you
I
guys arguing or fighting, or like was she even trying to do 50-50 or anything like that, or she wanted full custody?
it was well, she was kind of surprised by the fact that I said I wanted a divorce. Because you can be in a relationship with people or whatever. A lot of times people they can take you for granted. Like she told me, you're not leaving me. You're never going to leave. This and the other. You're not going to leave because she thought that she knew my relationship with my sons. I mean, we were like this, so she already knew there's no way he's going to leave his kids here. He's going to leave his kids. And I said, well, you know what? You hold on to that because I'm gonna try to see if I can get custody of it. So by the time I started the process, she was shell shocked. She wasn't ready. Because she thought because at some point once the relationship is over with, if you're in a marriage, at some point it's business. It's no longer about the emotions between me and you, because now I have to do what's best for me and my children, and if obviously you're not on the same page. So if you're not putting them first, then I have to. And if I have to put them first, that means I'm no longer thinking about this relationship. So all of the decisions I'm making now are all business, so I'm all about trying to make sure they're in the right schools. I've always had been close with them and close with everything that they've done. So I'm always been in the school. So all the teachers know me. My youngest son was 4 years old, so he was still in daycare. Everybody in the daycare knew me. So a big part of a guy say, "Oh, I don't get to see my kids. I don't get to see my kids." You can't limit yourself. So your relationship with your child is totally separate than your relationship with this other person. So me and my sons are like this. Because we've always been like that. So even when my marriage failed, my relationship with them never changed, and they've never been without me. They never lived outside of my house ever. They visited her, but during the whole process, they never had to leave my house. Because I told them, I said, I'm always going to be here. You know, it's never going to be I'm having a bad day. I don't want to do this. No, I'm always going to be here. And the thing about it, all my sons play sports. Man, I'm 6'5". I got two sons that are 6'10". They all play
Jesus.
basketball. All my sons. So since they was like 4 and 5, we were
Yeah.
in the gym. They were raised in the gym. So that's all we ever knew. And a lot of women aren't built for that. In the
Yeah.
gym all week, every weekend. So for me to be able to give them the time that they needed, I had to be there. I couldn't be coming over to pick them up on Friday or Saturday. I couldn't do that. That wasn't enough. So all of these things, I was like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do. So once the decision was made to petition for custody, like I said, she wasn't ready. So when I went to court, I went by myself. I didn't have any. I had my buddy, my best friend Dave. He was a witness, but she had a lawyer. She had gotten a lawyer. She had come up with this elaborate story about me.
So you went pro se though when you went into court?
Yeah,
Oh wow, good for you.
yes, yes.
Wow.
So yeah, because all I had was my character, who I am, and everybody. Like if you met my sons right now, they would walk up to you, look you in the eye, shake your hand, and introduce themselves, last name first. That's how I've raised them, how respectful they are. So when people see them, they're like, his kids are amazing. So he must be doing something right. So there was nothing or nobody that she could bring in there that could say anything negative about me and how I raised my kids. She could say stuff about me and her relationship, but that no longer matters. And that's all your word against mine. So none of that mattered anymore. So I went into court by myself. I sat there for 45 minutes, watch her and her lawyer, make up stories about me, lie about me, come up with all different types of things about me. I sat there, didn't say a thing. The judge looked at me, said, "Mr. Melvin, come on up. Is there anything you'd like to tell us?" I said, "Your Honor, I am not here to disparage her because I need her to help me raise my sons. I'm only here to get the opportunity." That's all I said. He said, "Mr. Melvin, you know what? We're going to give you that opportunity. We're going to let your son stay with you. We're going to give her a regular visitation. We're going to build a visitation schedule for her. And that's what it's going to be."
That's unbelievable.
It was
I mean,
amazing.
right. That's unbelievable to hear all these dads that come on and say that, they dropped hundreds of thousands of dollars on these lawyers and for years they're going through this, but you went in there pro se, she had a lawyer and, and they're, dropping story after story about you. And then you just go in and say that simple thing and he
The
gives you
key,
the
the
opportunity.
key,
That's
the
amazing.
key, right? The key was, so we had, and when you're contesting custody like that, you have social services involved. The kids have a guardian ad litem, so the kids have an attorney. So you're doing home studies. They're asking people questions at the school. They're asking questions at my son's child care. So all of these things, the judge has all of this information.
Hmm.
He has the study from the social services who've interviewed both of us and the kids. No, so he already has all this information. So he's asking her questions. So he'll ask her a question, and I'm sitting there like, "Well, she's gonna lie," and she's lying. I'm like, if the judge is not gonna ask you any question he doesn't already know the answer to. So if you're gonna lie to him, you only gotta lie to him once. Then he's not gonna trust anything you say after that.
That's a good point,
So
actually.
right, right.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I'm like, and people. But I did a talk with a friend, another guy, and he said, "So you kind of just let her, just be her." I said, "Yeah." I said, "I just sat back and allow her to do what she was going to do because I know how emotional she is. I know how irrational she is. She's from DC, so I know how she is. So so all I had to do at that point, she was so angry with the situation because she had already been out of the house 8 months at that point. You know, so, and like my sons, they were thriving. They were doing. They had some little emotional issues, whatever, because now all of a sudden, mom and dad, who have always been together, they're not together anymore. So there was a struggle there initially. My youngest son was 4, so they were 4, 7, and 10 when I got custody first time. So they were young, and they had to work through some things. My oldest son, he was 10, so he had some. He took it a little bit harder. So he was a little angry. So I took him, I took him to a therapist. So we did like 12 sessions with a therapist so he could talk through things, this, that, and the other. So, and then, like I said, and even in my book, I talk about still have to be aware of your kids and where they are emotionally, and you have to take care of those things. So if you see that somebody is struggling, and you can tell, the grades start slipping, they start getting angry, you start having issues in school, you can tell when those things are starting to come. So you have to address those things early. And if they need to talk to somebody, then you have to get them the resources that they need, because they don't always want to listen to us. So it's easier for them to talk to somebody who doesn't have an interest, doesn't have an emotional connection. So I got my son counseling at 10, so it was very helpful. And he
And
talked.
this was just the older, just the 10-year-old. The
Just the
other two
oldest
were
one.
good.
Yeah, the other two were, they were fine.
Yeah.
They had little things, but they got to talk through with the social service counselor, so they got to talk through some of their stuff, and they had the guardian. They had got to talk to the guardian. So I didn't have any kind of real things that like percolated. No, I didn't see any like issues at school. They were still doing well at school. They were still doing these other things. They still wanted to play sports. They still wanted to do those things. So they were fine. And my oldest son, always been very active. He's an athlete also. So I was able to I was able to keep him engaged in those other things to kind of distract from what was going on with me and his mother and that kind of stuff. So that was helpful. But like I said, you have to pay attention to your children. When something's not right. So you kind of have to address it. You can't let it fester. You can't let them just, wallow in these other things. You kind of have to really pay attention and talk to the teachers. I'm at the school all the time. All of them knew me. And if there was an issue, they would reach out to me and let me know. So this is what's going on, so I could address it early. So you really have to pay attention to your children and those kinds of things when these things are going on. But that was the first time.
Yeah.
I retired from the military in 2007. So I got custody of my kids in 2000. Well, here's the deal. I went to Korea for a year. I was leaving my ex before I went overseas. I got this assignment, so I stopped it. I signed a lease and was moving out. So this is when I thought that I had to leave. I was moving out, signed the lease. 3 days after I signed the lease, I got an assignment to Korea. So I canceled it, went to her and said, "Hey, this is what's going on. This marriage is over. I'm going to be gone for a year. So you have a year to get yourself together, save your money. Yeah, and then when I get back, we're going to have to make a move. We're going to have to change this thing up because it's not working. We're both miserable. So now is a good time for you to really get yourself together and be ready to make that move. Right. I get back from Korea. She hadn't worked the whole time. So she was, relaxing or whatever, doing whatever the whole time I was gone. So that's when it got really tumultuous. I did move right back into the house because of how bad it was. And that's when this whole process started. When I did move in, I put the plan in the works. He's like, "Yeah, this is what I need to do, and this is how I'm going to do it." And then that's when the initial one started. So I retired a year later from the military. I was stationed down at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. I knew at some point I would have to come back up to the Maryland, D.C. area because that's where all my job opportunities are for what I do. So I knew, and she's from D.C. So I was like, well, I'm moving back to Maryland. You're going to eventually move back to the area also. So I don't see where anything would be a problem, with as far as visitation. And we had already had the formal schedule and all, had already started visitation and those kinds of things. So once she realized that I was getting out and moving, she tried to stop me from moving by running back to the court.
Mm.
So she petitioned again for custody to try to keep me in Virginia, well, down there in Virginia. Okay. So nothing in the court system works fast. So by the time we got a court date, I had already relocated. To Northern Virginia, had the kids in school, and they were rolling. So by the time we got to court in Northern Virginia for this new custody thing, we went through the whole process again. Social services, guardians, this, that, and the other. Went back to court. The judge was like, "Why are we here? They're doing well. Nothing's going to change. He's already moved. They're already in school. They already have, back in the day of sports. They already have new sets of friends. So why are we here?" She tried to, well, he moved it without telling me this, that, and the other. Well, he informed you that he was moving. He only has to give you 30 days notice. And he used the process the way it's supposed to be used. So nothing's going to change. And it's just been the same way since. It was the same
Because
way.
that's when you already had custody of the
Right.
kids, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
I
Yeah.
had already been awarded custody. We were a year into it at
Yeah.
that point. We were a year into it. So Once we made the move, it was just one of those things. You're not going to just do anything without me. One of those power play kind of things that didn't quite work out. But so we moved, we got them back in school, this, that, and the other. So it was that whole process is like I explained it in my book, because there's a lot of guys out here who don't feel like they have a shot, don't feel like they have an opportunity to raise their kids, that they can't, and I tell people, I say, even if you are not in a position to want your kids full time, you can get more time. So even if a judge says, hey, you get this 6 weeks, this, that, and the other, you get this every other weekend. If you present them with a schedule of things that you want to do with your children and the times that you want to do those things, and you're consistent, most judges are going to see that as a positive thing. So how is it ever going to be a bad thing for a guy to want to spend more time with his kids, even if he's not full time? More time is better than none. So why wouldn't you want to give him that opportunity if he's stepping up and wanting to do that? So I talk about all of that stuff in my book because I think it's important for guys to realize that. I think my situation is not necessarily like everybody else's, but it opens the door for the possibility of having a chance to raise your kids and having a chance to spend more time with your kids, because kids need you. There's no one parent is better than the other, and the one parent is more important than the other. If both parents are equally willing to put in the time and effort, then that's a good thing for the children. So why should the court stand in between?
Yeah, that's one thing I think a lot of parents, don't see eye to eye with. A lot of dads that come on say, we need both parents in their lives. We need the dad, we need the mom. A lot of moms, on the other hand, are saying, I want full custody. The dad can see the kids when I say he can see the kids, and it's just like you're not thinking of the kids when you talk
It's
like
all right.
that or do
Not
anything
at
like
all.
that. So it's yeah. Is your book kind of like a guide on, like, it's your life, but kind of like a guide with that?
Yeah, my book is
Okay.
funny. The way my book is laid out is it talks about it's basically from when I was a kid, growing up like I said, in the projects. It talks about you know making decisions, making a good decision, because it's every chapter there's a set of lessons learned, things I learned during this part of my life. How what I learned about being raised by a single mom in the projects and making the right decision and not having a father in my life to kind of guide me. Talks about when I went to high school. I thought I was a basketball player. I went to Dunbar High School, which is one of the best high school basketball programs in the history of high school basketball program. I show up thinking I'm good, and then I get over there and I realize, oh, I'm just another guy. You're just
Yeah.
another guy,
Yeah.
So going through that, and how having a father in your life when you're even at that point, if having somebody there pushing you and encouraging you is amazing, and that's why I said I would always be there for my sons, because if I had somebody in my corner really encouraging me and pushing me, like my mother never went to one of my basketball games. She had too much going on, but if I had a father there who was there encouraging me and pushing me, like I said in my book, just be present, just be there. That's more than any gift you can give your child. Time is the greatest gift you can give your children. So I talk about that, like I said, and everything is lessons. My time in the military. I talk about a big part of it is about custody, visitation, how to manage child support, how to not necessarily manipulate that part of it, but how to better control how much you have to put into it.
Hmm.
Because there's ways to manipulate it. My ex did it. In a lot of states, if you get over 90 days of visitation, there's a different calculation. So you pay less. So there's ways to do that, to manipulate the calendar so that you get enough days that you can manage that amount of child support that you're paying. And I talk about all of that stuff in the book. But then I also talk about, I was single. Like I said, I was married for 17 years. I got single. My youngest son was 4, 7, and 10. Hard to date when you have three young kids,
Yep.
especially if you're a man with three young kids. So dating was a struggle. So I talk about, how do you date when you have young kids? When do you present somebody to your children? Like before my kids
Hmm.
were grown, I think they may have met two people that I dated, for all of those years, because you can't bring everybody in front of your kids. If they're not, if my son sees me with somebody now, like after they got grown, if they saw me with somebody, they knew it was somebody that was important to me. They knew it was somebody because they had never met anybody that I was just hanging out with. So I prioritized them when they were young.
Where
So
do you get these lessons from? Because you said you grew up without a dad. You just had your mom at home. You seem like a great man and father. Was it even before the Air Force, because I know the Air Force, kind of puts those roles into you, but before that, going into high school, you were doing good in school, you had good grades. Like, did you have a mentor or someone like that around?
Mm, no, I
Wow.
didn't. I didn't. It was I don't even know because like my mother was very strict on us. But even with that, you can only control so much of what your children do. So ultimately, they have to make the right decisions. So I think maybe I was just a square growing up. It's because me and my brother were totally opposite.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, so when he was doing his thing, I was doing this thing. So we always had different circle of friends, different things. We were always doing different things, So she had to put more energy into keeping him in line than she did me, So and I love my brother, but he was definitely he was definitely a challenge when we were younger, So I was easy. I was the easy one, She never had to worry about me because I was going to class, I was going to school, I was doing my homework, I was doing all these things because I enjoyed it. Like I said, I was a square. I enjoyed school. I enjoyed, I was just a good kid. So that part made it easy. And then once I got older, the military was huge for me because now I'm around strong men, strong leaders, strong mentors, who had families, who were raising kids. So I'm seeing these men raise their children and this that, and the other. So I got to see that kind of stuff, and I'll talk about that. That's why it's important. I'm supporting a guy who has a program in Baltimore called the Advocate where he's advocating for young men who are single parents. So he does a lot of stuff in the Capitol. He does a lot of that kind of stuff. Great guy, Eric. So with that, the conversation is how do you talk to an 18-year-old father? How do you talk to a 19-year-old father? And how do you get him to understand that once you have a child, that's a different relationship than the relationship that you have with that mother. So even have to treat her a different way. That's your child's mother. So you can't be disrespectful. You can't, do all these other things because that's your child's mother. Ultimately, that's your child's mother. So the way you treat his mother is the way he's going to treat women. So they learn that stuff. So you have to, even though this relationship is over and you can't stand her or whatever, and she can't stand you, you have to get past the emotional side of it. You have to take the emotions out of it because as long as you're emotional, you're going to make rash decisions. You're going to make decisions just based off on that negative energy, and everybody's going to see it. And when you walk into court and you're all pissed off, the judge is going to see it, and as a black man, they're automatically going to see this angry black man. And when they see that, they're gonna look at you negatively walking in the door. So you're always gonna be the other one. You're always gonna be the other one. So you have to channel that negativity and that energy and try to take as much of the emotions out of it. And you also have to be prepared. You also like I've always got a notebook with me because I forget stuff. So
Mhm.
if I go anywhere and I need to talk to somebody, either I have my notebook or I'm putting stuff into my phone because I forget stuff. So when I went to court, I make sure I write everything down. I have my notes because I know I get emotional, so I know once you start thinking and start, oh, this, I want to say this, I want to say that, I want to say this. I go look right down, look at my notes. I make sure I hit all the key points in my notes so that I get everything I want to get across. And now, when you're sitting there and you're talking, you're not all flustered and you're not all trying to figure out what you want to say, because when you feel that way, you can look down, refer back to your notes, and now that can get you back on track. Control your emotions, be organized, and then just allow the system to work. Because I think in most times it'll work the way it's supposed to. You get these rogue judges or whatever who just have an agenda. And you kind of there's not a lot you can do about that. You can just do the best you can. But a lot of these places are turning around now, and we're getting
Mhm.
opportunities. So if you know that you're going to get a fair opportunity, or you feel like you're going to get a fair opportunity, then if you're ready, then you can get as much as you can get out of that. You don't have to just take a bad deal. You don't just have to say, "Oh, I can only see my kids this amount of days," because you just gave the judge a schedule. You just gave the judge all of these things that is why you should have this time. And more times than not, they're gonna say, "Okay," because they don't have a reason not to, unless you are not consistent with it. If you make promises that you don't keep, then you get what you get. That's just in life. That's just a life thing. But especially with your kids, you really want to be consistent. You really want to be present, and those kinds of things. So I'm jumping around now.
No, I mean, that's great. I was gonna ask you for some advice, but I think that's some perfect advice for dads out there, and especially, don't let your emotions take over because, you're not gonna get anything good out of that.
Not at all.
Where are your kids now? How old are they now? And like, obviously not personally, but like,
No, I can tell
what?
you.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I can tell you. My oldest is 30 now, so him and his wife
Okay.
just moved to Texas. So they moved to Texas about a couple months ago, which I'm not happy with because they just had my first grandson a year ago.
Uh,
So now I had to see him over Zoom. So that's not I don't like that at all because that's yeah. So I'm not happy about that. My
yeah.
middle son, he's 27. Yeah, he's 27 now. He has a place out in Bethesda, him and his girlfriend. So he's doing well. Well, he was a basketball player and has played a lot. He played in college. He played overseas, a couple different places overseas. So he loves basketball. So he's training out in Bethesda. Works at a gym, training out of Bethesda, and then he also does some computer stuff with his uncle who has his own business out here in the area. So he's doing well. He's happy. And then my youngest son is also a basketball player. He was at Lemoyne College a year ago, had ankle surgery. So he's been on the shelf for about almost 2 years now with his ankle. But he's going to go back to school in the fall. He has 2 years of eligibility left. So he'll be playing basketball here in the area at Bowie State in the fall to get his graduate degree. But they're all doing well. They're all responsible grown men. They're not out here chasing a whole bunch of women or being disrespectful, making babies all over the place. So I think I did a good job with them.
I was gonna say it's
And
because they had their father figure in them. Yeah.
it matters. It
Yeah.
matters, and you are their example. I mean, I had my first son when we were married, but I was 29 when I had my first son. My son, he was 29 when he had his first son. And that's just how it worked out because you have to live. And if you're in a relationship, you really want to know that person. You want to get all of that running around stuff out of your system. So when you have a child at 18, there's a lot that you miss out. You feel like you missed. So you're still trying to catch up to all your friends who are out there and doing their thing. So it's hard to want to be a dad, full-time dad, when all your boys and everybody else is out loving life and living life. So that makes it tough. So if any advice that I would tell anybody is, hold off. Don't have kids until you're absolutely ready. I know it's hard for a lot of folks. I mean, it shouldn't be as hard as it seems, but I mean, you got to, just like anything else, it's a decision. So you have to decide that, hey, I don't want to have kids anytime soon. So I have to make sure that I'm taking precautions to not have kids anytime soon. And I'm not just hanging around or sleeping with anybody. I have to make sure that those people are quality people that are, if something happened, it's something that I can live with if something does happen, because mistakes happen. Nothing's 100%. None of these procedures of preventing pregnancy are 100%. There's nothing that's 100%. So there's a chance that it can happen. So, but if there's a chance that it can happen, at least let it happen with somebody that you can live with, not somebody that you got to fight for 18 years. So make better choices in the people that you even spend your time with. I mean, even people that you give yourself to. Just anybody doesn't deserve you. So it's kind of those things. Just having those
Yeah.
conversations and stuff with kids and stuff.
I think
And
I think that's a big one, especially with younger kids. I
hmm
had my first kid when I was 22 years old, which was still pretty young, and I was adopted, but I still had my adopted parents around my whole life and all that. They got divorced, when I was young, so I was angry, but I didn't know, I didn't really think about the repercussions. I love my kids to death. They're the best thing ever now, but it's like when I had them when I was so young, I was like, just like you said, my friends were all hanging out, partying, doing whatever, and I'm sitting there like, damn, like I gotta go change diapers, and I stopped hanging with my friends because of that. I had to be a dad. So yeah, I think a lot of young dads need to hear that for sure.
right. But even with that, you kind of a lot of them you miss it. A lot of folks feel like they missed out on something. So now later on they're trying to catch up with it. Now they're 30 and 40 chasing 20-year-olds or hanging out, this, that,
Mhm.
and the other, and want to be out in the club doing those other things because they feel like they missed that when they were younger. Just like you can't get it back. So you
Right.
have to just have to make good decisions and live your life. But I talk about that. I talk about dating, and I find, like I said, when I got divorced, I was not a nice person. So I was not, but I was honest with people. I was like, hey, I'm not looking for anything. I just got divorced. I was married for 17 years. I'm not looking for a relationship. So if you spend time with me, you have to understand that this is what it is. This is the guy you're gonna get, you
Yeah.
know, so but then you gotta allow them to say, oh, well, I'm different, and it's no, you're not. Not right now, you're not. So I'm sure that I missed on a lot of women who would have been perfect for
Mhm.
me. It just wasn't the right time. So once my oldest son, they're all grown. My youngest son is, he's 23. You know, young. They're all older now. You know, so about a year or so ago, I met this beautiful young lady. You know, so you meet the right person at the right time. You know, then things can work. Got engaged this past fall. You know, so everything is working out. You know, so it's going well. But I talk about all of that in the book. How to date, how to date with a purpose, how to do all of this stuff. You know, all of that stuff is in here.
I love it. Well, congratulations. And where can people find the book if they want to check it out?
Well, I have a website. It's my name is Corwin.Melvin, www.corwin.melvin.com. If you go to the website, you can order the book. I also have a free download for single dads, some lessons for single dads, a nice little pamphlet that they can download for free along with the book. The book's $24.99. It's a steal because I think it's great information for everybody. And even I tell people, hey, there's some stuff in here that moms can use if you're in a difficult situation with an ex. You know, there's ways to deal with that. You know, the ways to take some of the tension out of that, and some of these techniques that you use that men can use, women can use. You know, so I know it's kind of giving them the game plan. But if you're dealing with somebody, I mean, if you're this angry, bitter woman, it doesn't really matter what the guy does. You're gonna be angry and bitter. You know, so all he can do is what he can for his children. You know, allow you to do whatever you're gonna do, and he just take care of his children. So, but even with that, there's a way to manage those kind of people. You know, by not giving them that energy. A lot of times when people you know they are all this that and the other, they're emotional, they're giving you all of this extra stuff or whatever. Once you stop entertaining it, they kind of go away. You know, once I realize
Hmm.
I can't get to you anymore, then what am I going to do now? I have to change my plan. You know, so as long as they know that they can poke at you and get you riled up, they're going to keep doing it. You know, as soon as you stop answering those calls, like my ex got my son's cell phones when they were young. I'm like, well, that means I don't have to take a phone call anymore. You know, so now you can call them directly. So now that made it easier for me. You know, so hey, if your kids have a phone, why is she calling you? You know, unless
Hmm.
it's something that you have to take care of for your children, you shouldn't be taking any of those calls. You don't have to. You don't have to take any of those calls if you can call them directly. You know, because why do you need to talk to me if you can talk to them directly? Unless it's something a parent issue. If it's not a parent issue, then we don't have to have regular conversations anymore because you can't have one. You know, if you're this type of person and you all you want to do is bring drama, that means we can't just have a conversation.
Hmm.
You know, it's automatically gonna turn into something more than something dramatic or some kind of anger. So why am I gonna entertain that? I'm trying to live my peace at this point. You know, I'm not trying to live your drama. You can give that to somebody else. As soon as you stop taking that, as soon as you stop returning that energy, you'll see the whole thing will change. Everything will change.
100%.
Yeah, the whole thing will change. You know, so I try to add some words of encouragement for that kind of stuff.
I love it. Awesome. This was an awesome episode. This was great, man. Thank you so
Appreciate
much
you.
for coming on and
I
sharing your
appreciate it.
story.
So this is my book. It's just
Hell
a
yeah.
dad.
Awesome. Well, you guys know where to get it. And thank you again for jumping on and sharing your story.
I appreciate it, man. This is fun for me. I like to talk.